Okay, so good evening, guys. My name is Maurya Hanspal, and this is the third session on wealth management. In the previous sessions of wealth management, we have talked about the different instruments of wealth management, but in very brief. We talked about everything that is starting from tax planning to retirement planning to which funds to invest in. Because all these things we try to analyze upon, but in these sessions, we'll be trying to analyze each of these details, which I talked about in the previous sessions in detail. So in the previous session, we left at mutual funds, and we wanted to start with mutual funds. Okay, so what exactly is a mutual fund? I will explain you. So what happens basically in a mutual fund? Yeah, destroy it. So what happens instead of like investing into individual stocks and buying individual stocks, mutual fund gives you the benefit of diversification. That is, you can invest into a basket of stocks, and those stocks would be from different industries: pharma, IT, FMCG, metals, capital goods, real estate. So why the concept of diversification is important? Obviously, if you would have invested only in one sector and that sector booms up, so that's great. But in the other scenario, if that sector comes down, it's a problem. Like for example, if before the COVID-19 pandemic, if anyone would have invested only in the hospitality stocks. So during this COVID-19 pandemic, the hospitality industry was zero or on negative points. His portfolio would have turned into negative. But on the other side, if a person would have invested into stocks of like different industries, IT industry, metal industry, pharma, hospitality, and many other. So even if the hospitality industry was down, the other sectors were up, right? So that thing he can just balance out his portfolio. That is, the profits were more and the losses were just from one sector, like whereas the other sectors were doing well. The pharma sector was on boom, like because of the demand for the COVID drugs and all. The IT sector was on boom, like because everything went online. The FMCG sector was also doing well because it's a defensive industry. That is the demand for the groceries, like would be there whether it's a recession or not. The metals were doing good, and the real estate sector also boomed up, right? So that is the benefit of a mutual fund. That instead of investing only in one sector or instead of investing only in one stock, you are diversifying into different funds. Again, in mutual funds also, there might be some mutual funds who would be like investing into just one sector, that is into the hospitality. So like these like mutual funds are also present here who just invest into the IT sector, who just invest into the pharma sector, or just invest into the banking sector. Again, that's a good diversification, but that we call it as a concentrated diversification. Like because again, if the banking sector goes down and the other stocks do well, you are not fully diversified. So you have to like diversify yourself into different sectors and different fields, and that is the plus point that you need to consider. So what happens? A pool of fund is created, and this is created by the asset management company, right? Your asset management company or the AMC, then people invest like certain amount of money. Now, when you are investing in a mutual fund, you can invest to two modes. One is the lump sum mode, and the second is the SIP mode. So what happens in a lump sum mode? Like for example, you invested rupees 5 lakhs into the mutual fund, and that's it. So on the basis of the market conditions, the value or the NAV of the fund, that is the net asset value of the fund, will rise and fall. Whereas the next is the SIP or the systematic investment plan. That is, instead of just investing a lump sum amount, you are investing 500 rupees per month or 1000 rupees per month until it suits you for 5 years, 10 years, or now. So that is the mode of SIP. Okay, like there are some mutual funds who says that you need to have a minimum investment, and on the basis of that minimum investment, you can do the SIP. But there are some mutual funds who say that you can start with zero and do the SIP as per your convenience. So like there can be some differences in it. Okay, yeah, that was a major concept. So what basically happens, a pool has been created by the asset management company, and you're like people are investing their money. Okay, and the people are given units. Like when you buy a share, you have to buy the whole one share. But in case of the mutual units, you get fraction of shares or the units of share. Like for example, 500 rupees like you have contributed as an SIP, and this mutual fund has 20 shares. So this 20 shares would be allocated. मान लो the first share has a weightage of 10% in the mutual fund, the second one has of 30%, the third one has of 0.5%. Then the first one will be allocated 10% of 500. The second one would be allocated 20% of 500, and the third one would be allocated 0.05% of 500. So this is how your money would be allocated to all those stocks. That is what exactly is a mutual fund. And as I suggest to see, diversification can be like within the sector also, but it is more beneficial to diversify across sectors. That is putting our money into different sectors. Okay. So basically, it shows you the structure of a mutual. Like for example, investment companies. Okay, like they have created an open-ended mutual fund and a closed-ended mutual fund. So what exactly is the open-ended mutual fund and a closed-ended mutual fund? That we'll talk about. Okay. Yeah. So based on their structure, see the mutual funds can be categorized into three types based on their structure, based on their investment objective, and based on their style. Okay, so firstly talking about based on their structure. So when I talk about based on their structure, so the mutual funds are based on their structure. You have two types of mutual funds based on the structure. You have the open-ended funds and the closed-ended funds. So what happens in case of the open-ended funds, you have no lock-in period. That is, if you have bought something, yeah, okay. Like you have like no lock-in period. Like for example, if you have bought some units of the mutual fund, you can redeem them at any point of time. But what happens in case of a closed-ended funds? These, if what basically happens in the closed-ended funds, for example, if you have purchased the mutual fund or purchased the units, you cannot redeem them before the lock-in period. And if you redeem them before the lock-in period, then some penalty will be charged and that can eat away your interest. So that is something. On the stock market exchange, the open-ended funds are traded more, like because they have more liquidity instead of the closed-ended funds. So that was like when we categorize the mutual funds on the basis of their structure. But when we categorize the mutual funds on the basis of their investment objective, we have the equity funds, the balance funds, and the debt funds. So what happens in case of equity funds? Equity funds like which are investing more than 65% in the equity, right? The stocks. The balance funds are like which are investing both into equity and debt in a certain manner, right? And what happens in a debt fund? In a debt fund, the most of the investment, more than 75 to 65% of the investment is going where? It is going towards the debt or the bonds, right? So that's something should be clear to you. That was on the basis of the structure and on the basis of the objective. The third one is on the basis of style, which is not mentioned here. On the basis of style, we have the active funds and the passive funds. In active funds, your main objective is to beat the index. The main objective is to beat the index in case of the active funds. Okay. So that is basically you are like investing into a portfolio which does not replicate the index, right? Like you are investing into like different stocks. You took the stocks from the large cap companies, mid cap companies, small cap companies, and like different sectors, industries, and all, which are not a part of the Nifty 50 or the Sensex 30. Okay, so you can take the companies like you took some companies which are a part of these indexes, and you took companies which are like not a part of these indexes because your main purpose was to beat the return of this index. Like for example, if Nifty gives you an average rate of return of like 11 or 12% per year, the main objective of the active fund would be to beat this like return. Okay, and the second kind of fund is the passive fund. These passive funds are also called the index fund. So what basically happens if the Nifty is giving you like 12-13% return, then these fund approximately would also give you like 12-13% return because their main task is to match the index. Okay, but like matlab ki what really happens, the expense ratios of these funds is very low in case of the index funds. And expense ratio is nothing but the expenses on the funds divided by the total AUM. But AUM is the assets under management. Assets under management is कि कंपनी ने कितने मतलब like उस म्यूचुअल फंड में कितना पैसा लगा हुआ है. Okay, so basically what is really happening? अब इंडेक्स में तुम इन्वेस्ट कर रहे हो तो द म्यूचुअल फंड मैनेजर or the portfolio manager who is handling your portfolio doesn't need to do any effort because index में जो stocks हैं बस देख के बस उसमें पैसा लगा दिया. That's it. Whereas in the active fund, the expense ratio would be more high because the manager is undertaking his expertise and knowledge. कि उसे like index से ज़्यादा लाना है and that works on the stock picking capability of the person. That is why the expense ratio, which is nothing but the expense charge on these mutual funds, is very high in the case of the active funds. But try कि max to max like 0 to 1 के बीच में रहे. ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा like expense ratio like 1.5% उससे ज़्यादा. Okay. So coming back to like when I was talking about the lump sum investments and the SIP investments, So what basically the history has shown, like when the market has grown in a steady state, okay, matlab the market has not gone down and the market has done well. In that case, the lump sum works better. But in the case if the market is volatile, like matlab ki not for a short term, like for 1 year the market falls, the other year the market rises, the third year the market is into the phase of consolidation. In that case, the SIP works. But in the real life scenario, we can see that the second thing happens like more frequently. Market goes down, goes up, then goes on a consolidated basis. It is not always that the market goes on a rise. Okay, so according to me, according to my thing, which I believe the SIP route is more beneficial. Okay, this was something that we talked about. Yeah, so when we begin, okay. So in the next session, like we would be talking about some of the advantages of the mutual funds and the disadvantages of the mutual, like of the mutual funds. That was all.